There's a story about Elvis Presley that feels like it was made for the internet. You may have even seen it yourself. The headline is always explosive. A drunk heckler challenges the king of rock and roll in the middle of a Vegas show, and Elvis, with impossible cool, invites him on stage and stuns an arena of 20,000 people. Not with a fist, but with compassion. It's the kind of story that feels almost too good to be true. It paints a picture of a man at the peak of his power, so confident and wise he could turn a heckler into a fan with just a microphone and a song. It's a beautiful moment, a powerful testament to the man behind the legend, and that's because it isn't true. The real story isn't about a heckler. It's not about a gentle lesson in kindness. And it definitely didn't happen in front of 20,000 people. The truth is about four men, a moment of pure, unscripted violence, and the night Elvis Presley, the global superstar, had to become a fighter to defend his own life, right in the middle of his show. The real story is infinitely more dramatic, more terrifying, and reveals a side of the king that the myths try to paper over. This isn't the story of a peacemaker. This is the story of a warrior king who was pushed too far. Before we get to the shocking truth, we have to understand the myth. Why did this particular story, the one about the heckler named Big Mike, go so viral? What makes it so catchy? As the story usually goes, it's November 14th, 1976, at the Las Vegas Hilton. Elvis is on stage when a drunk construction worker named Bobby Big Mike Henderson starts shouting insults. He calls Elvis a fake, a phony, a pretty boy who's never faced a real fight. The band stops. The crowd is horrified. Security moves in. But then, Elvis does the unthinkable. He stops his security. He looks down at Big Mike, not with anger, but with this calm, fatherly sense of control. He invites the man on stage. He hands him the microphone. "You think it's so easy?" he supposedly asks. "You show me." What follows is a masterclass in de-escalation. Big Mike tries to sing, fails miserably, and is met not with scorn, but with a standing ovation, led by Elvis himself, who then helps the man find a job. It's a tale of redemption. It's the Elvis everyone wants to believe in. The problem? Almost. Every single detail is verifiably false. The first thread you can pull that unravels the whole thing is the crowd size. The story always claims this happened in front of 20,000 stunned fans. That number is simply impossible. The Las Vegas Hilton's main showroom, where Elvis had his legendary residencies, had a maximum capacity of around 2,000 people. It was an intimate dinner theater setting, not a stadium. Claiming 20,000 fans were there isn't a small exaggeration. It's a giant red flag that the storyteller has no idea what they're talking about. Beyond that, there's a complete lack of credible evidence from the time. In the 1970s, Elvis was one of the most famous people on the planet. An event this dramatic, the king stopping a show to have a sing-off with a heckler, would have been huge news. It would have been in newspapers, mentioned in reviews, and recounted in the countless biographies written by people who were actually there, and yet it's in none of them. There are no Associated Press reports, no tour logs, no audio recordings of this confrontation have ever surfaced, even though many of Elvis's shows were recorded, officially or by bootleggers. The story of Big Mike seems to have just appeared out of thin air decades later, a piece of modern folklore that went viral not because it was true, but because it was a simple, satisfying story. It's fan fiction that looks like fact. So, if the story of the gentle king schooling a drunk heckler is a myth, what's the truth? What really happened on that Vegas stage? For the answer, we have to rewind the clock. Not to the twilight of his career in 1976, but to its absolute peak, to a year of unbelievable highs and terrifying lows. We have to go back to 1973. To understand the explosion of violence on that Vegas stage, you have to understand the man at the center of it. The Elvis of early 1973 wasn't the wise, gentle figure from the Big Mike fable. He was a god, a conqueror, but he was also a man living on a razor's edge. Just weeks before the incident, on January 14, 1973, Elvis had pulled off what many consider the high point of his entire career, the Aloha from Hawaii via satellite concert. It was a global television spectacle, the first of its kind, broadcast to over 40 countries with a potential viewing audience estimated at over 1 billion people. He was trim, powerful, and radiant in his American Eagle jumpsuit, a living symbol of superstardom. He had come back from his Hollywood exile and reclaimed his throne as a global icon. But what the world saw on TV was only half the story. The triumph of Aloha hid a much darker reality. The pressure to stay a god was crushing. His return to Vegas for his 8th season at the Hilton was a brutal grind. 2 shows a night for weeks on end. The physical toll was immense, and his reliance on prescription drugs to manage his sleep, his energy, and his chronic pain was already deeply ingrained. According to reports from people in his inner circle, Elvis was battling health issues during that very engagement, struggling with the flu and his voice just days before the attack. Beneath the surface of the sold-out shows, tensions were boiling. His personal life was in shambles. His divorce from Priscilla was final, and her relationship with karate instructor Mike Stone was a source of deep, burning anger for Elvis. This wasn't just heartbreak. For a man of his pride, it was a profound betrayal that wouldn't stop festering. And then there was the fear. The late 60s and early 70s were a dangerous time to be a celebrity. The Manson murders had sent a shockwave of terror through Hollywood. Fame could make you a target. The FBI had a file on Elvis detailing numerous death threats. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, received letters threatening Elvis's life. His security, the famous Memphis Mafia, wasn't just for show. They were a necessary shield against a world that felt increasingly dangerous. Elvis himself was often armed, and he insisted his friends be too. So you've got this perfect storm of pressure, anger, and fear. And it led him to double down on the one thing that gave him a sense of control: karate. For Elvis, this was no hobby. It was a deadly, serious passion. He started training in the Army in 1958 and became obsessed. He was a legitimate and high-level black belt who trained under masters like Ed Parker, the founder of American Kenpo karate. His friends said his movements were crisp and powerful. He didn't just practice the forms, he studied how to use them in a real fight. He even funded and starred in his own unfinished 1974 documentary, The New Gladiator, to show off the brutal effectiveness of Kenpo: eye gouges, throat strikes, joint breaks. Karate wasn't just showmanship, it was his armor, it was his weapon. He worked the stances, chops, and kicks into his stage act, and the crowds roared. But they weren't just watching a dance. They were watching a man rehearse for a fight he felt was always coming. So, in February 1973, you have a man who is at the peak of his fame and at the mercy of his demons. He's exhausted, in pain, nursing a private fury, and living with the constant fear that someone could try to hurt him at any moment. He was a walking powder keg, trained in martial arts to respond to a threat with immediate, overwhelming force. The stage was set, not just for a concert, but for a confrontation. And on the night of February 18th, that confrontation finally arrived. The Las Vegas Hilton showroom was electric. All 2,000 seats were filled, with dinner tables packed around the stage. The air was thick with smoke, anticipation, and the clinking of glasses. On stage, the king was in his element, a demigod in a white jumpsuit, sweat on his brow, with the powerhouse TCB band roaring behind him. He was in the middle of his set, doing his ritual of draping scarves around the necks of adoring female fans at the front of the stage. But on this night, there was a weird vibe coming from one of the front tables. A group of 4 men and a woman were acting strangely. According to some anecdotal accounts, they'd been disruptive from the start. Then came a bizarre moment that's become part of the story's lore. The woman from the table reportedly walked up to the stage, took a scarf from around Elvis's neck, went back to her table, and handed it to one of the men. Some of Elvis's security saw it as a marker, as if she were marking Elvis for the man. Whether that was the intent is impossible to know, but it was an unnerving break from the usual fan behavior. The tension was about to snap. As the band launched into a high-energy number, many accounts say it was during or near Suspicious Minds, the situation exploded. It wasn't one man. It was four. In a coordinated rush, they bolted from their table and charged the stage. The audience gasped. For a split second, nobody knew what was happening. Was this part of the show? The raw aggression of the men answered that question fast. This was real. Elvis's security, including his cousins Red and Sonny West, moved to intercept. But Elvis was on the front line. The first man lunged at him. What happened next wasn't the flashy karate of a movie. It was the brutal, instinctive reaction of years of training. Elvis didn't panic. He didn't back down. He turned to face the threat. As the man came at him, Elvis dropped into a low karate stance. Then, a blur of motion. Reports from the time suggest Elvis used a powerful block and kick to send the man flying backward off the stage. Elvis himself was the first line of defense, and he did not hesitate. Chaos erupted. While Elvis dealt with the first attacker, his bodyguards swarmed, the others in a full-blown brawl. Red West, a former Marine, reportedly grabbed one assailant and hurled him from the stage. Band members jumped in to help, and in a truly surreal moment, the TCB band reportedly kept vamping the music, trying to provide a soundtrack to the mayhem. In moments, it was over. Hotel security and sheriff's deputies swarmed in, and the four men were taken away in handcuffs. The showroom, which seconds before was filled with music, fell into a stunned silence. The audience had just watched their idol physically fight off attackers on his own stage. All eyes were on Elvis. He stood center stage, breathing heavily, adrenaline pumping through him. The performer was gone, replaced by the fighter. He walked back to the microphone, his anger visible, and then he addressed the silent crowd. The words he spoke that night are legendary. A raw glimpse into his true state of mind, and a far cry from the gentle wisdom of the Big Mike myth. According to numerous sources, including his own bodyguards, Elvis looked out at the audience and said, his voice laced with fury, "I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen." He paused. "I'm sorry I didn't break his goddamn neck, is what I'm sorry about." The shock in the room turned into a roar. The audience gave him a massive standing ovation, not for a song, but for the raw defiance they had just witnessed. The show went on, but something had changed. The illusion of the untouchable star had been violently torn away, and for Elvis, the fight was far from over. When the lights came up, the story of the attack began its journey into legend. For the audience, it was an unforgettable night. But for Elvis, it was a psychological trauma that would crank up his deepest fears and send him into a spiral of paranoia. The immediate aftermath was physical. The force of the attack had taken a toll. A fascinating artifact that has since surfaced in auction circles is an X-ray of Elvis's right foot, taken the very next day, on February 19th, 1973. On the label, his name is misspelled Presley Elvis. A tangible record of the violence. It was later determined that the four men were likely just overzealous, drunken fans, not assassins, and Elvis reportedly didn't press charges. But that didn't calm his mind. In his world, already clouded by threats, the attack was proof that he was vulnerable. The line between a crazy fan and a killer had become terrifyingly thin. This is where the story gets much darker. The most detailed and most controversial account of Elvis's mindset after the attack comes from the 1977 tell-all book, Elvis, What Happened, written by his fired bodyguards Red West, Sonny West, and Dave Hebler. While the book's motives are still debated, was it a plea to save their friend or bitter revenge? Its depiction of Elvis's reaction is chilling. According to the book, the incident triggered a dangerous, obsessive rage in Elvis, focused on an old wound, Mike Stone, the karate champion with his ex-wife Priscilla. In Elvis's mind, clouded by prescription drugs and paranoia, he became convinced that Stone was somehow behind the attack. What followed, as detailed in Elvis. What happened? Sounds like something out of a gangster movie. Elvis allegedly began talking about hiring a hitman to kill Mike Stone. He reportedly told his bodyguards, "There's too much pain in me. Mike Stone must die." He ordered Red West to get a contract. On Stone, Red and Sonny West claimed they were horrified and tried to stall, hoping the rage would pass. Whether Elvis would have ever gone through with it is a question that, thankfully, was never answered. But the fact that he was consumed by such dark thoughts shows the psychological damage the attack had inflicted. It had confirmed his greatest fear. He was a target. The incident permanently changed how he felt on stage. Giving away scarves, once a symbol of connection, was now a risk. Anecdotes from his entourage claim that after the 1973 attack, Elvis began carrying a small handgun, often a Derringer, tucked into his boot during every performance. The man who sang "Love Me Tender" was now, by these accounts, prepared for a fight to the death. He would never feel truly safe in the spotlight again. The brawl was more than a footnote in his career. It was a turning point. It shattered the image of the untouchable king and revealed the frightened, angry, and isolated man behind the jumpsuit. The world saw a superstar fend off a few drunks. What they didn't see was the deep and lasting scar it left on his soul. So, let's go back to the story that started it all. The viral tale of Big Mike and the wise king who stunned 20,000 people with a lesson in kindness. It's a nice story. It reinforces the gentle, mythical image of Elvis that's been polished for decades, but it's a fantasy. The reality of what happened in Las Vegas is far more brutal, chaotic, and ultimately more human. It wasn't a lesson, it was a brawl. It wasn't one heckler. It was 4 men charging a stage. It wasn't in a stadium, but in the close quarters of a 2,000-seat showroom. And the king's reaction wasn't gentle forgiveness, but swift, trained violence, followed by a raw, uncensored howl of rage. The true story of the February 1973 attack shows us the man behind the myth, a man grappling with incredible pressure, heartbreak, and a constant, gnawing fear for his life. A man who had mastered a martial art not just for show, but for survival. On that night, the performer vanished, and the fighter took over. This incident wasn't just a shocking interruption. It had a profound and lasting impact. It shattered his sense of safety on stage and deepened the paranoia that would plague his final years. It allegedly fueled a dark anger that led him to contemplate the unthinkable. This event adds a new, dangerous, and tragic layer to his legend. It's a stark reminder that beneath the glimmering jumpsuits was a man who felt threatened, a man who believed he had to be ready to fight for his life at any moment. The story isn't as neat or uplifting as the myth, but it's the truth. And the truth, with all its messy, violent, and complicated humanity, is always a better story. If you enjoyed uncovering the real story behind this incredible myth, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. The life of Elvis Presley is filled with secrets and stories that are even more dramatic than the legends. There are more untold stories about the king coming soon, and you won't want to miss them.